your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I love to sing your praises. I'm so glad you're in my life. I'm so glad you came to save us. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. You came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your name on high. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Your love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God.
Right now, we're in biblical faith, trusting in the truth, pleasing God. That's the way I titled this. I want you to turn to first, just go back just a bit in chapter 10, verse 32 through 38, where we're coming into this from. But recall the former days in which you were once illuminated. You endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle both by reproaches and tribulation, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepting the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. Verse 37, for yet a little while, and he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Verse 38, the key verse, now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. Last week as we went through these verses, these were to remind the saints of what they had already gone through, of how the Lord had brought them through various things, and how they weren't ashamed to have their stuff taken away from them. They weren't ashamed of identifying with other saints. They endured that persecution willfully. And now, as time goes on, there's a temptation to just go back into it. The idea of the just shall live by faith is the springboard that we have. The writer goes on to say that we're not of those who draw back to perdition, saying this is a warning for those of you, so you can give other people warnings, but I'm confident that this isn't really of you. But of those who believe to the saving of the soul. The reason that I wanted to highlight the believing is because, why? Because we live by faith. And the thing about believing to the soul is it's the same word. It seems so different in English, believing in faith, but it is really the same word. One is a verb, one is a noun. If you want to really, if we said belief, it would be the same word as faith. And the reason that we need this definition is because it's so important to the foundation of where we're going. It's important to remember our own testimony to God. That helps to bring back into our minds how He has blessed us, how He has gotten us through different things. and how, I don't know about you, but when I first got saved, and I think that's the way it is with most people, is you kind of have a fearless faith. It doesn't matter what people think. You've been freed from the shackles of sin. You can say no to yourself for the first time in your life, and you don't care. I remember I was very, very bold. I didn't have any sense to be otherwise. And then as time goes on, you start getting more careful. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Maybe I'm going into a second childhood, but I seem to be getting bolder again like I was in my first days. I look at that, one of my favorite verses in the Bible is Isaiah chapter 40, verses 31. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of evil. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings of eagles. They shall run and not grow weary. They shall walk and not faint. Never brush your teeth and scrub your tongue in the morning. You can't do a thing with it afterwards. But I look at that, and I'm kind of looking at my own life, and I'm going, that's kind of the way I am. I mean, I remember when I first got saved, I mounted up with wings of eagles. I soared like crazy. I got older and a little wearier, and I could run, couldn't quite fly anymore, and not grow weary. As I got older, then I can kind of walk and not faint. Now I'm going through a second childhood, and I'm learning to fly again, and it's very vigorous. It's a good thing. But we need to look at a brief definition of what faith is. Let's look at the first three verses of Hebrews chapter 1, 11 chapter 1, verse 3, 1 through 3. Maybe I ought to pray again. I will after I read this, for sure. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the words were framed by the word of God, so that the things which were not made of things which are visible. Father, as we go into your word, we ask, Lord, that you cut through all of the stammering and stuttering and the tongue-tiedness and everything else, anything that would confuse or hinder your word. We would ask that your Spirit would speak to all of us, to our minds, to our ears, to our hearts, that we might be equipped for these days that you've caused us to live in. These days that there's so much confusion, and yet we know that you're not the author of confusion, and we know that you have a plan. In Jesus' name, amen. So this very first verse. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Earlier this week, Becky was talking to me, and she likes to find out how I'm doing. And she goes, well, how is your study going in Hebrews chapter 11? I'm going, it is tough. And she says, really? On faith? And I said, yeah, it is tough because it's a huge, huge topic. It is monstrous. Now, I've often said that when we come together on Sunday morning, it's like we come together for a meal. It's a meal that we can enjoy together. Well, I hope you're hungry, because this thing on faith is like roasting an elephant on a telephone pole rotisserie or something. It's a monstrous topic, so I'm not planning on going too far with it today. We'll have the whole chapter as we go through different people demonstrating the way God worked in their lives. But I'm just planning on going through these first three verses today. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. This verse isn't so much a strict definition of faith. It's a description of what faith does. it's kind of like 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That chapter on love isn't really a definition of love. It is a description of how love operates. And that's what this is all about. We look at it and it's not so much a definition. Marvin Vincent, in his 4th volume of Word Studies of the New Testament, I'll try not to bore you with this stuff, but I thought it was fascinating. He published this volume in 1887. He examines the meaning of Greek words in this sentence. He says, faith is without the article. So there's no a or there's no the. So it's not just a faith, it's not the faith, speaking of Christian faith, it's just faith. Without the article, it indicates that this is treated as an abstract conception and not merely as Christian faith. It is important that the preliminary definition should be clearly understood, since the following examples illustrate it. As we go in through these examples that we're going to see, all these people of faith, because this is called the Hall of Faith, this chapter, understand what faith is. The key verse is furnished by verse 27, as seeing him who is invisible. Basically, faith apprehends as a real fact what's not revealed to our senses. So we start seeing with something beyond the eyes. Faith is real seeing. The literal definition of faith, this word, means to trust and rely upon. See, we often think of faith as something else, or we think of belief. When I tell you that it's the same word, one's just a verb and one's a noun, you think of believe as simply acknowledging a fact. When most people think of faith, they think of trusting in something that has no evidence, trusting in something that is just wishful thinking. The world's definition of faith and the Bible's definition of faith are two different things. And so when I'm talking to people, and I'm talking to people in the world that don't know God, I try not to use the word faith. I try not to use the word believe. I try to use the definitions. What do you trust in? What do you rely upon? What is your God? Where do you get your strength in the morning? All through the day. What do you really rely upon to guide your life? That's your God. So I try not to use the words because they are too easily misinterpreted, because the world has redefined what they mean. I use those words when I'm around believers because I assume that people know what I'm talking about. Some of the things that biblical faith is not, what the world defines it as, is not a blind optimism or a manufactured feeling or hyped up confidence. That is not faith. And yet I hear sometimes even preachers on TV that give it that definition. They try to hype up your confidence, try to boost your faith by over and over again saying things. That's ridiculous. It's not intellectually agreeing with the doctrine. It doesn't rely on superstition. And what is superstition? Superstition is trusting in something that has absolutely no evidence, that is not factual at all, that goes against all evidence. That's superstition. Real faith is trusting and relying on God, no matter what we're feeling, no matter what our circumstances. It's not that it's in spite of evidence, but it's going, I know who is able to change this circumstance. I know who's able to calm this storm. I know who's able to get me through. I know. And we'll see different examples of this and be reminded of it. We're to remind ourselves of our own testimony, but also to look at other people's testimonies before. stories that we're familiar with, stories that build our faith. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Substance. That literally is a foundation, support, substantial nature, or basis. So, our trust and reliance is the basis of things hoped for. And again, hoped, anticipated, expected, not wishful thinking. Hoped is the idea of you know that something's going to happen. And I like to use the example because a lot of people just don't understand what hoped is. They think it is wishful thinking. Hoped is expecting something, you know it's going to happen, such as a kid knowing that they're going to have a birthday. They don't know when it's going to happen exactly, if they don't know how to run a calendar, but they do know that it's going to happen. I'm going to be 7 this year, or I'm going to be 5 this year, or something like that. That is hope. It's an anticipated, expected reality. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. It's an interesting word for evidence, too. It is literally proof, being convinced of. It's not simply a clue that you see in a mystery that is evidence. It's actually the conclusion of all the evidence. It's the proof that you need. Now, the last bit of this is faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And I didn't think that this was any big deal in the word at all until I was going through Vincent's little deal. It's scary when I get a new book. But this literally means a thing done, an accomplished fact. It's not restricted by past, even though it's already been done in this sense, but it's not restricted by the past, meaning that it is continuing on in the present, and it's going to continue on in the present, or in the future. It has nothing to do with time, even though it's already happened. It's happening and it'll continue to happen. What things? Well, God's promises. So, my paraphrase interpretation of this verse, if I was going to make a paraphrase of this particular verse, I would say trusting and relying on Jesus is the basis of things expected, the proof of being convinced of things that have happened and continue to happen and will happen that I can't see. And because of the very nature of the word hope and the anticipated expectation, I would say the things that I can't see yet, but one day I will. I was reminded of what hope is all about this Thursday when Hensley showed me that she had just lost her second tooth. And she was hoping or expecting some loot from that tooth. Told me this morning that she got $2 for it. I'm going, good grief, that wasn't even a buck tooth. So this next verse is an introduction on how I only got a dime when I was her age. Anyway. The next verse is an introduction to how trust in God worked in the lives of some of the Old Testament saints. What was that? Okay, meanwhile, back at the ranch, let's look at verse 2. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. As we explore these testimonies, I expect that we're going to see some fascinating things. that we know as history, but we'll also be able to relate them to our own lives. Some of the successes, some of the failures, but overall how God is able to bring us through. And one of the things that's fascinating about as we go into these characters, when you look at this hall of faith and all these characters, I mean, I've read the Old Testament many times, and I have seen the warts on these Old Testament saints. And yet, in the book of Hebrews, this 11th chapter, this hall of faith, there is not one negative thing said about any of them. It doesn't show any of the flaws. It's like their sins, their mistakes are cast into the sea and buried. And so we need to look at it that way. It's what we trust and rely upon. I am thankful that when I stand before the Lord, that everything has been taken care of. Faith. Verse 3, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made, which are the things which are visible. We understand. That literally means that we perceive by the mind's eye. It goes beyond our senses, but it involves our senses. And the worlds were framed by the word of God. That word is literally ages. I look at the very first words in the Bible. In the beginning, God. We see that he created. It goes on to say that. But that is just such a comfort to go back into those words. In the beginning, God. Long before the microscope was invented, long before people could see molecular or even better atomic structure, the Bible specifies that things were created, that time, space, matter was made out of things that were invisible. You know, when you look at different things, if we could look closely at this pulpit, if we had good enough eyes, electron microscopic type eyes, we would see that this is really not solid. It's an electrical field generated by molecules that are at a great distance from each other if we looked at them size-wise. There's more empty space here than there is solid, but it doesn't look that way to us. The entire universe was formed out of things that we cannot see. But God knew. God knew. In the very first verse, he created space. In the beginning, God created the heavens. That's literally empty space. And the earth, that's matter. Then by the time we get to the third verse, he creates energy. Let there be light. When you get light and you get energy, when you get energy and you get matter, what happens? Time. Everything starts out in those first few verses. I spoke last week about how young faith, biblical faith, but young, untested faith is challenged, and how it's a responsibility of parents to equip their kids knowing that there's going to be a challenge to their faith, that there are people that are going to be in authority, there's people that are going to, you would think could be trusted, but they really can't be, because there's an enemy that wants to destroy their faith. And it doesn't matter how old someone is, if they're a new believer, they need to be equipped. They need to be prepared for war. If we as parents or as Bible teachers pray with someone and they accept the Lord, that's great. But if we only tell them about the love of God and the way that God cares for them and wants to take care of them, protect them, provide for them, and everything like that, and we don't warn them that there's an enemy out there that's going to try to eat their lunch, then all we're doing is we're preparing lambs for the slaughter. We're fattening them up. So we need to prepare. We need to let people know, this is a spiritual warfare. I look at this whole COVID thing, and I think it's a spiritual warfare. It tries to isolate people. It gives control to governments that they never had before. And it tries to isolate. Why is it that Christians seem to be singled out on this deal a little more so than anybody else? Oh, they're not singled out. Really? You can go to a cafe and it was 50%, but it was only 50 people in a church and don't sing? Oh, come on. There's just a lot of hinky stuff going on about the whole deal. And I don't think it's worldwide, so I'm not going to blame it just on this country. I'm going to blame it on the God of this world. We don't fight against flesh and blood. We fight against principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. I think that this is all part of it. It's just preparing us. But that doesn't mean that we need to fear. It just means that we need to be prepared. God, you got me through the different things. You're going to get me through this. I saw you got Moses through the Red Sea. Well, I'm not going to get ahead of myself on this stuff, but I'll wait till we get to Moses. But scoffers, they use the same tactics the devil used to the woman in the garden. They haven't changed because the one that they're getting their info from is the same way. I don't know if any of you saw the movie God's Not Dead. But it really shows a lot about what goes on the university level. And people need to be prepared for that. Mike went back to college after he was already long in the tooth. But he was also well established in the Lord. And it's interesting, some of the bully professors that tried to bully some of his classmates didn't realize that Mr. Lassiter was in the class and that he wasn't born yesterday. So if you want to get some stories about what goes on and how to confront different things, talk to Mike. He's got some great stories. But some of the things, how is it that the devil tempted the woman? How is it that scoffers try to malign Christians? Does your God restrict you from something desirable? Something natural? Isn't that what the devil said to the woman? Isn't that what people in the world say to believers? Oh, you're not allowed to do that. Did God really say? Oh, come on. They laugh. Oh, that won't happen. You're not going to die. Did he really create everything in 6 days? You believe that? The races came from just one man and one woman? Did he really cause a flood to cover the entire earth? And a man to build a boat and take animals that repopulated the earth? They scoff. They laugh. A big fish swallowed a man and had him digesting in those juices for 3 days, and he lived. And on it goes. Till finally, and God sent his only son to become a man, and he was killed, buried, and then rose again from the dead. They laugh at stuff like that. And I can take every one of those scoffing things and say, yeah, I believe that, absolutely. I have no problems with any of those things. But I remember when my young faith was challenged. I was trying to reconcile the biblical account of creation with what I'd been taught in school by people that I was supposed to trust. And there was a lot of people that I was supposed to trust back in those days, and the first chink came in the armor when all of a sudden it came out in the news that the government knew that the nuclear testing in Utah was responsible for a lot of the cancer, leukemia type deaths that happened to people. But not only did they expose that, they exposed that they knew about it for a long time and just were covering it up, were lying about it. I'm going, what else were you lying about? So then I started questioning other people of authority that told me things. And the thing is, I grew up south of Twin Falls, Idaho. Now, between Twin Falls County and Jerome County, there's a great gulf called the Snake River Canyon. Didn't make sense to me when I went through earth science, clear back in junior high. Because the way I was taught, the way earth science taught things, was that you could tell how old a river was by how big the valley was and how steep the sides. Now, I lived in a place where there was a big canyon, 500 foot deep in places. So that meant that it was a very young river. The trouble is, going upstream, Burley, Idaho, 32 miles away, it was an old river because it was a big, wide place and the river was right there with the land. And then if I go downstream and get all the way down into Lewiston, just before it joins the Columbia, again, it's a big, wide, old river. So it was old, then it was young, and then it was old again. That just didn't make sense to me. And so then I started looking at different things and going, okay, well, and this took time. I saw so many things that changed rapidly through a little bit of a tremor or a big snowfall, and it just redid the landscape. And I'm going, So I started looking at different Christian scientists, Dwayne Gish, Henry Morris, and those guys, and going, well, this stuff makes a lot more sense to me than that. And logically, it was just a very freeing thing. I'm just kind of going, I've been lied to. And plus, they just tried to make me too old. When I went to school, the earth was, I was told in science class that the earth was 2 billion years old. Now they're saying it's 20 billion years old. I'm 18 billion years older than when I first moved here. Well, but see, if you're trying to explain creation, and the scientists have kept themselves from looking at things too objectively because they have made rules on the way that they analyze facts. They say that they cannot analyze anything other than using natural processes. Okay? Otherwise, it's not science. I remember I was trying to share the gospel with a guy that was delivering some steel to a job site that I was doing, and trying to share the gospel with this truck driver. And he obviously got tired of me talking to him. And so finally, in frustration, he says, well, I know what I believe. I believe in this truck. This truck makes a living for me. It's been reliable, and it's always there when I need it. Now think about that truck. Where did that truck come from? Now, if I said that a truck came because there was an intelligent being that had the ability to gather together all of the steel, all of the glass, all of the rubber, all of the copper, all the fuel, everything that it needed, and put it together in a certain way so that it ran, then that would be my view. But it took an intelligent being from the outside to do that. if I was a scientist and had to use it and analyze it by their laws, I'd look at that truck and I'd go, okay, well, let's see. First of all, it's going to take a long time for things to happen naturally. I see that every element in this truck is made out of the same elements in the ground. So basically, it's just dirt. I know dirt. Lightning must have struck an iron ore deposit at the same time that there was an earthquake that got some carbon close to it, and that created the steel. I'll deal with the chrome later. That same lightning bolt hit some sand, and the silica melted into glass. Well, the copper, obviously, that was also affected, but the tensions on the earth stretched it out into wires, and that another lightning bolt came along and hit some oil deposits and made the plastic that covered it up. And then there was a great tornado that came along and whipped everything together, and this is how it happened. Now, I know that it couldn't happen. The odds of that happening are just ridiculous. And yet here it is. Here's the truck, so that must be what happened. And I say that because there was a Nobel Prize winner that made the same statement. He says that the odds of this happening is 28 I can't remember the numbers now. I know that there was 28 zeros after it, so it was a number that was too ridiculous to even fathom. And he says, so we know that it's impossible, but here we are. We see it, so it had to happen that way. And we give prizes to people like that. Well, it is so much easier for me to just say, in the beginning, God. He created. You can come up with all of this stuff, but it just doesn't make sense. Not when you really analyze it. Can't reject an outside force. I mean, there's just lots of things in logic that just, the impersonal never gives rise to the personal. In other words, a bird nest doesn't create a bird. The bird creates the bird's nest. The personal always gives rise to the impersonal. I know that sounds ridiculous, that whole little scenario I went, but there were some things that I was taught. We all came from simple cells. When you analyze a simple cell, that's more complex than that truck that I described was. Trusting and relying on evolution isn't based on evidence. It's a doctrine that is blindly accepted. That is the opposite of faith. That is superstition. So the things that people challenge or make fun of out in the outside world actually are things that boost my faith. I know it's kind of weird. I've looked at things now. The worldwide flood. There was a worldwide flood. Come on. Well, yeah. How do you explain coal deposits if you don't have a worldwide flood to bring them all together? How do you explain fossils? They're not fossils being created now. They were created quickly. It happened. You have trouble with this? Go to Mount St. Helens and look at stuff and see how many millions of years it took for that to happen. Opening the Red Sea, destroying the Egyptian army. I watched a great little documentary on Amazon Prime, and it actually showed how, and there was, they can't bring any artifacts up because it's a closed country, but they had films of these encrusted barnacle chariot wheels. I mean, they were pretty obvious in what they were, and tons of them. It was pretty fascinating. Yeah, even Amazon Prime gets it right. A big fish swallowing a man, simmering in his digestive juices for 3 days, comes up and preaches to a city. Oh, yeah, I believe that wholeheartedly. You want to be able to talk about getting somebody's attention. You know, what people don't understand is the Ninevites, they worshipped a particular deity. Their city deity was Dagon, the fish god. This fish pukes up Jonah on the shore, and he's all bleached out and stuff like that. Yeah, they'll probably listen to him. I'm sure they had sentries. It was the capital city of an empire that ruled the world. I have no trouble believing that. In fact, if God isn't able to do stuff like that, and he has to just do things by natural processes, because that's what it had to happen this way, it had to happen in a natural way. If that has happened, then is he really that powerful? God isn't a natural God, he's a supernatural God. He goes through all of that stuff. So, I mean, I don't have any trouble with that. Do I believe that Jesus Christ died, was buried, and rose again? Absolutely. There's tons of evidence on that. Tons of evidence. And the thing that's great about that